Stand.
I call to order the February 18th Student Achievement Committee of the Whole meeting. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? All righty.
Hi, Superintendent.
Treasurer Guston, please call the attendance roll.
Certainly. Ms. Armbruster?
Here.
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Crossett? Here. Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Ms. Mapp?
Here.
Vice President Moffett?
Here.
President Craig?
Here. All righty. Superintendent Murphy, please present our first of three presentations today.
Yes, thank you, President Craig. So today we have Director Turner coming to share with us. He is going to review guardrails 2, 3, and 6 tonight. And we also, Director House was able to join us as well. The last time there were some questions and the board requested if she could be present in the future. So she is able to be here tonight. So for now, I'll turn it over to Director Turner.
Thank you. We're going to try out a clicker tonight, so we'll see how that goes. Hey, everyone. What we'd really like to do is have me cover 3 and 6, answer any questions, and then turn it over to Dr. House for guardrail 2. 3 is kind of dependent on some of the things that happen with 2 because they're survey questions. So here goes. The clicker does work. That's great. So we are starting on guardrail 3A, which is slide number 9. Guardrail 3A is a survey question, and I do want to preface guardrail 3 by saying this is the first time this has been reported on this year. So the questions in the survey were given back in the fall. But it's the first time that we've talked about this. And so guardrail 3A is the percent of parents and caregivers who have a favorable response for climate on the district survey. So back in, when this was given back in September, 86% is that number. We do not have the historical reference of what happened earlier in the year to now because it's not given again until the spring. But that is a good number. Guardrail 3B deals with staff, and this is the percent of staff who have a favorable response for climate on the district survey. Again, that was 87%, and this is the first time that we've reported on that, and this will be given again in the spring, and then later in the year we'll have a comparison. Some of the action steps, which again, Dr. House, her work like intersects with this in a great way. So a lot of her action steps directly impact this. But just 2 to call out is anytime we improve clarity and consistency around behavioral expectations, that certainly makes a difference in the attitudes and how people feel about climate, whether it's families or staff. And then all of the things that go along with positive school culture, with the coaching that occurs for de-escalation strategies, and all of the things that are ongoing instead of just one and done PDs definitely impact those responses. Guardrail 3C is a kind of a different one, but again, this is how it was in the strategic plan. This actually deals with stakeholders, and unlike the previous 2 guardrail items, this one is given in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And so this one is the percent of partners and other stakeholders who have a favorable response for communication on the district survey. In the fall, that was 73%. In the winter, it's 64%. Again, this is the first time that we've reported on this. I do want to say about 3C, one of the things that you're going to see when we look at guardrail 6 is there seems to be an inconsistency between how partners feel. This one is specifically, the question specifically talks about communication. It's pretty to the point. And you see that percentage, you're going to see something much higher in a little bit. So the action steps, really looking at this one, is analyzing the partner-facing survey questions to make sure that there are no inconsistencies in those questions, which could lead to inconsistencies in responses. Also, the cadence for partner-facing surveys doesn't match the cadence for the other surveys. So one of the things that we would point out about this one from fall to winter is it's survey fatigue for those partners. I don't know that the response rate is as high as we would like it to be in the winter because they just took the survey a couple months earlier in September, and so then it's being given again in December. And could that account for low responses? And so one of the action steps in talking with Assistant Superintendent Badgett about this one is really asking partners in non-survey settings. So when there's partner meetings, how do they feel about communication? What did they think that question meant? And that will help us get to the bottom of why that number went down, but also why it's low in the first place. So that leads us to Guardrail 6A, and so I'll follow up on that survey response 3C in just a second. Guardrail 6A, if you remember, is the percent of schools with an active LSDMC. Active LSDMC, based on the requests that were given earlier in the year, is now very clearly defined. It's an updated roster, district-wide meeting attendance, and mid-year lead agency evaluation. Back in October, we reported 86% of LSDMCs would be active according to that definition. In January, that's 98%. The reason why that one is 98% is there was one school missing their mid-year lead agency evaluation. They did not have it completed, so Assistant Superintendent Badgett is working with that school. Some of the action steps that need to keep going with the LSDMCs is making sure that there's annual training for new members, monitoring completion rates of those lead agency evaluations, and then also recruitment is always crucial because two-year terms sometimes are hard to fill if people go off, and then making sure that guidance around updated rosters, meeting attendance, and lead agency evaluations is being given. So Guardrail 6B is where we feel there's a disconnect between the communication question for partners and other stakeholders and then this question. So this guardrail is the percent of partners and other stakeholders who have a favorable response to their partnership with the district. Same survey, different questions. In the fall, that was 71%. But in the winter, it was 84%. So it would lead us to think that how would partners have a favorable response to their partnership with the district being so high, but then when there's a question about communication, that one was significantly lower. So we've had some conversations about that particular communication question. I will say consistently, partners have a favorable response for their partnership with the district. So there's something going on with the communication question, and so we've had some conversations about that. So what are they doing to help partners feel like they have a great partnership with our district? There's regular partner meetings, there's lots of agency check-ins, there's always ways to look at the partner communication systems. It seems like partners feel like their communication around the partnership is good, but when they see communication from the district, maybe they don't really know what that question means. And then, as always, making sure that marketing and communications department is familiar with the partner database, because that is certainly a way to reach out to more people. So if I could answer any questions or take notes about 3 and 6, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. House for the discipline category 2 piece.
All righty. Board members who have any questions about 3 and 6, Board Member Bolton.
Thank you. I'm still confused as to why you think there might be a disconnect about communications versus how the stakeholders might feel about us. I mean, I've been here a long time, and communication is a systemic problem, period, in the district. We don't do it as well as we should or need to. So I could see where people feel strongly about their partnership and maybe what they're doing, but I don't think we are succeeding yet in the communication piece. I see that more as a systemic issue rather than necessarily something specific to that particular item. Thank you.
That's great feedback, and I think that the new strategic plan process will probably impact some of our surveying techniques as well. And when you look at the question, perhaps the question could be asked in different ways to find out why. And I don't know that that's being done. Thank you for that.
Other board members? Board Member Armbruster?
Yeah, I would love to understand a breakdown of the, for guardrail 3A, the demographic breakdown of the parents and caregivers who responded to this, because I have to imagine they are already engaged families and caregivers. And I would assume people that are already engaged in their school and or the district would hopefully already have a more favorable opinion of the district. So I would just like to understand like what percentage of the population is responding, what schools those respondents are coming from, just to get a better idea of like, is it actually representative of the district as a whole, or is it skewed a little bit just because of who that's coming from? I would love for that to be representative, and it might be. But I know with these surveys, sometimes the respondents are people that are happy and engaged with the district overall, and so they wanted to express that. So would just like to see a little bit more info.
All righty. Board Member Mapp and then Board Member Crossett. And then
Yes,
Dr.
just
Moffitt.
a very general question, as it pertains to, I think, guardrail 6 around the partnership piece. When the partners are responding to this survey, do you know who has access to this overall survey? Is this the maybe the director, or is it consisting of all individuals that are representative of that organization that have access to responding and giving feedback on the survey?
Yeah, so I am 99% certain that the survey is sent out to the main contact person for that organization. I don't know that the district has ever said to the organization, please distribute this to other people within the organization. So I think that's a very interesting concept to look at. But I don't know that that has been the practice in the district.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, it's just a thought, you know what I mean? I think that, like, I could understand why it would be sent to the main contact. Obviously, they would be the voice representing their partnership, but I'm wondering too what that then looks like for those that are directly interfacing with our students that may be separate from whoever that point of contact is, and what feedback we could receive that could be really helpful in us understanding how to strengthen our partnerships in the work that we do.
Yeah, great point.
All righty. Board Member Crossett?
Yes, thank you for the information, and I appreciate my other board members' questions. I agree with them. I'm wondering on the partnerships, if there's a way to granulate that a little bit, maybe by type of partnership. I mean, I think that we have some partners that are very interested in one school, some are district-wide, And maybe there could be some granulation on that, especially like maybe it's somebody helping with English language versus, athletics or something. So be interesting to see if there's any insights on that. Thank you.
It's great.
All right. And Vice President Moffitt.
So, Mr. Turner, thank you so much for this information. I think my board colleagues have asked the question. I just want to be a little bit more succinct. When you gathered this data, what was the sample size that you used to come up with 84%?
So for the partners, I do know that what they ended up getting responses back for was somewhere less than 100. I do remember that number. For the parents, the staff, it was a lot for that one. Part of the conversation that we've had with partners with that survey is you send it out and you get back what you get back because it's more of a limited amount. One of the things that Brian Sershin, who's the data guru that tabulates all of this data, one of the concerns, which I don't think factors into this, but could factor into, but I think if we have a reset on the surveys with the new strategic plan, when you broaden the scope of who it goes out to, sometimes that can cause a dip in data because you're widening the outreach. But I will say with the partners currently, that number was less than 100 respondents, but that is consistent from the fall to the winter. The winter number was a little bit lower, but both numbers I know were under 100.
So that's the response rate. I'm
Yes.
wondering what's the sample size? So if we have 500 partners,
Yeah.
and I'm also curious as to how we're defining the word partner. So if we have 500 partners, I'm going to put that in air quotes, and 100 of them responded, and we got an 84%, that's a different number than
Right.
we had 500 people that we
Yep.
sampled, and only 100 of them responded. So 20% of your population responded and gave you that. So that's kind of, to everyone that has asked the question, I'm very interested in the disaggregated data because I was looking for the link and I didn't see it there. Because if we can go to slide 9, Rob, the percentage of parents and caregivers, I'm not sure 86% is represented. I don't know what 86% is representing because I'm nervous to think that 86% of our parents feel that have a favorable response. I would love to believe that is certain, but I am very curious as to who was sampled, and then what was this 35,000 people sampled? Was this just elementary people sampled? Was this the people that just automatically respond, as Board Member Armbruster said? So that 86% needs a little bit more disaggregation for me. 3C, slide number 12, Rob, is very similar as well. We sampled them in the fall, we sampled them in the winter, we sampled them in the spring. What's the sample size? Because I'm just curious as to response rate versus sample size. What is
Yep.
that telling us? So when you say that it seems rather interesting that communication, there's a problem with the communications question, and it's about communicating. So that just
Yep.
is laughable. But again, it's ironic to me. I'm just very curious as to what are we reporting out? What do those numbers mean? And for me, it's like the discipline data. Where can we improve? When we set these up with goals and guardrails initially, I know we're not using that system, but the board I felt when I voted for it, that communication was an area that, to Board Member Bolton's point, we've had a historical problem, and that was an area we wanted to see significant improvement. So when we look at numbers, I don't want us to just look at the number and say, oh, it's going up. What does it really mean? And I just, again, I'm going to invite you to come back or send via email data that's just a little bit more representative of where is this coming from? Where are we having a communications problem? Who is responding to the surveys? Do we need to do more work at the high school level with parents? The data should tell us more than just an 83% response rate. What is that 83% and who is responding? And how do we capture the other 17%? Or where is it coming from? And I just don't have any interest to waste y'all's time on areas that not clear areas that we can improve upon. So I would love to get a little bit more succinct data. And particularly because we've had a concern around LSDMCs, can you define the LSDMC? You said we're defining, go back to the LSDMC slide, Rob, because that's a significant, say again? Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, go back to the.
Yeah. So previous to this year,
Okay.
LSDMC, it was a number that was given that said it was active. And I can't speak to, that was before
it.
me, so I can't speak to like what that actually meant. But based on what the board asked after the first presentation this year, what does active mean? So active now is updated roster, district-wide meeting attendance, so the quarterly meetings that are held for LSDMC representation, and then mid-year lead agency evaluation. So in October, the 86% number represented schools that had all three of those things met. So there were some who did not have some of those met. But now, the reason why it's 98% is there's one school, which has probably been corrected since this was submitted. They did not have their mid-year lead agency evaluation completed, which again meant that they did not count in the number at all, which would have put it at 100%. The goal is 100%.
Right. So let me ask you a question, because I think Assistant Superintendent Badgett's not here to answer it directly. So an LSDMC that just has a president or a chairperson, a vice chair, and a secretary is considered active, yes or no, by that definition that you just gave?
If they have submitted an updated roster,
Regardless of the list, submission of a roster is the defining factor, right?
that is what has been conveyed to me. Those three things: updated roster, district-wide meeting attendance, and mid-year lead agency. Now, updated roster, I can talk with Assistant Superintendent Badgett about that, or maybe Superintendent Murphy can give a little more detail on that. But that is the definition that this data is based on.
Okay. Superintendent Murphy, can you shed a little bit more light for me on
I
that?
will share with you, our goal is a completed, updated roster with all the components evenly spread about. That is the goal. I can find out from Assistant Superintendent the last time it was updated to ensure that that's what's happening.
Yeah, I would really I'm very curious about that, because I'm afraid, again, we're trying to get to 100 instead of, with fidelity and integrity, worrying about what is on the roster. We've only got 3 people. I just don't understand how that's hardly representative of an active LSDMC. But I'm very curious and welcoming the updated information. Thank you.
Board Member Lindy.
Thank you, President Craig. I think my questions are in line with Dr. Moffat's. They were just about the parent responses instead of the partner organization responses. Could you speak a little bit about the numerator and the denominator?
So what I will follow up with is I will get Brian Sershin to give a file. It could be volumes, but I'll try to get him to pare it down. I know that there were a significant amount of parent responses, but we have not reported. I reported the way that it's been reported in the past, and so there was not the granulation of how that number was calculated. But I will follow up with Brian and get him to put something together as to how many parents actually responded with that. And then the demographic breakdown as well that was asked for.
That's great. I think it's just 2 numbers, the total number responded and the total number asked.
Right.
So it can be short. Great. That sounds interesting too.
Yeah.
The two numbers I was asking for were the two, and I think demographics sound great too. And then this is something I do know that the administration has shared in the past. It's just been a minute since I've thought about this. When we say had a positive response, can you just walk through what that means?
Yeah. So let's look at comparisons. So in the past, the previous administration was calculating by question. If a question had 51% or higher, because I asked when I took on this role, when I came to this, I'm like, explain this to me, like how is this calculated? So I'm just picking a number. If there were 20 questions and if 10 of them had 51% or higher as a positive response, then the calculation was we had 10 out of 20 that had a positive response. So there wasn't like a weighting of if 95% were positive on one response, but only 51% were positive on another. They all counted the same. So one of the things that we looked at in working with Brian Sershin, plus you also have to remember that we went from the one survey tool that was being used now to Qualtrics, I forget what it was called. Yeah, Panorama. And so the questions then had to be realigned. So now the way that he is calculating it is more of an actual average of the responses, not looking at if one question said, I'm happy with my child's principal. I don't know, I'm making that up. And if 51% said yes, then that was counted as a favorable response. And all of those then were put together with numerator and denominator to get, it's not done that way anymore. The way it's calculated now is looking at the aggregate of the questions to come up with percentages. And some questions don't really have anything to do with perhaps how they feel about their school. So I'll get him to put all that together. With this, I will also say I think it's a great opportunity with the new strategic plan to kind of set how metrics are calculated as well, so that if there are changes in leadership or changes in the staff that even put this together, it's very clear on how this is calculated. And I think our surveys are one of those things that it's not calculated the same now as it was because we changed the survey tool, but also some of the ways just did not necessarily give an accurate depiction, because everybody could have said 51%, and we could have said 100% of parents had a favorable response, if it's item by item. So we'll get Brian, I'll get him to put it together in some sort of summarized way so that it's not like a huge file, because it is a lot.
I think this is a good start. I think we have at least one new board member. I think Mr. Crossett was here when this happened, but just for some historical context, for a moment, we were using this tool called Panorama. Panorama had some real advantages and at least one challenge. The challenge was very expensive. And so as we were losing federal COVID money, this was painful to me because I really like Panorama, but we did have to make cuts. That's an area where we cut. But one of the nice things about Panorama is that it asks questions to hundreds of school districts around the country. And so when you get results on student satisfaction or around staff satisfaction, around parent satisfaction, you can benchmark the results against places that aren't CPS. And so I think there's been some, commitment from the administration to try to create something on our own that lets us do as much of that as possible. I think I'd like to spend no more than 1 minute trying to do an example to see if I can understand this. And if not, then I think some follow-up would be great. Sure. And whatever that follow-up is, I don't think it needs to be a data file. I think it can just be a slide that explains what this 86% means and how it's calculated. Yeah. And if that could live in future presentations so that if it'll help me remind myself too. But if we were to just imagine there are 10 questions that we give 100 parents, what would need to be true about their responses for the number here to be 86%? Is that a question that can get answered today?
Well, not, again, not, so I would not want to necessarily give my answer to that because Brian has his way of feeding all of, because Qualtrics calculates all of this, but I will say it is not calculated the way that it used to be calculated, which meant that if all 10 of those questions had a 51% or higher positive answer, then in the old way, it would have been 100% favorable, which really is not accurate because do we want 51% of our responses to be favorable and say that we're at 100% favorability? What Brian does now is he calculates the actual questions that deal with this to come up with that percentage. So it is a numerator denominator based on the size who answered, not question by question, and just saying all 10 of them were positive because 51% or more said yes to this in a positive way, then that's a misleading number. 100% would be the old way, and that's not
Yeah.
indicative.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think from my perspective, I'm glad that we are doing this. I think this is an important thing to look at. It is probably impossible for me to size whether this is good or bad or neutral if there isn't a really clear explanation for where it comes from. Thanks.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I think the metrics need to be spelled out, how they're calculated in the document, and I don't know that we've had that.
So I'm going to give a couple quick statements here, and then we can do another round, but just really briefly, because again, we have a very short agenda today. We want to keep it short, but I think in some ways what folks are telling you, Superintendent, but then also you, Mr. Turner, is that what we want to be able to decipher is the value that should be given to the information that is received as to what these numbers mean, right? And so part of that is if it's a low turnout, which most of our surveys, quite honestly, have always been low turnout surveys. We have not had historically large percentage of parents or students completing the survey. Everything from COVID all the way up till more recent, it's always been a fraction of the number of parents who respond to surveys. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of lack of consistent information, a lot of other factors that are part of that. But I think if we know how much value to give to it by being able to see some of where this stuff comes from, where the information comes from. I know Mr. Board Member Cross had brought up a very good point about understanding whether or not some of the partner groups are partner groups that work with everybody versus partner groups who work with one school at a time.
Yep.
If the folks who are mostly responding are the folks who work with everybody, well, then that gives us a little bit different picture as to why they might respond more often than someone who's only working with one school in a very limited way. So I think that's one aspect that we certainly can look at as we go in the future with survey information in general. It's just giving us a little bit more information about the context of the survey, right? So who answered, like what, number of people answered, number of people who were sent the request to. I think the other part that may be just a better question for us to think about with regards to active LSDMC, and that just may be another conversation we have for a different day. It is one thing to say a group meets. It is another thing if only 2 people show up at the meeting, right? And I don't know that any context of the world we would ever say you have an active board if only 4 board members showed up on any given day. We would be, questioning whether or not that board was actively engaged in their work, right? And so I think that's the same for LSDMCs, is that's the point, that they're actively engaged in the commitment of being an LSDMC member. So I think some things like maybe attendance or stuff like that might be other factors that we would potentially look at, but I don't, because Mr. Batch is not here today, I won't task that to you, but I will certainly say to the superintendent, that's something for us to think about as we look at what does it mean to be active. I think what we were trying to get to is a point where we had an LSDMC set up at every school. We are now at that point, so now the goalposts may need to be moved to what does the LSDMC do? The third point, and I think it's been raised enough times here to kind of think about and address, communication and performance in partnership are vastly different things. And I think Board Member Bolton talked about this. We've always had this issue with communication. I think we do need to maybe think about what does that communication with a community partner mean? Because sometimes what we're really talking about is that they're not informed of what opportunities they can connect with. They're not informed of what's going on in the district, but they're able to do their work. Right? And that may mean their partnership work is done. It's good. We're good. We're getting this stuff done. There's no problem here. I might be able to do more, but you guys don't come and ask me. You guys don't come and talk to me about it. You guys don't tell me anything about it. And I think that may be a lesson for us to learn. It may not be. I have no idea. But I think that's something that folks were raising today. And then the last point I will make, I think we also need to make some strategic decisions with regards to surveying over the next few months, because we are about to embark on the strategic plan conversations. And if we truly want a robust number of folks who respond and are actively engaged in their strategic plan process, I think we have to be a little bit more strategic about what questions from a survey standpoint and when makes sense to ask them. Because if we're constantly asking people to fill out a survey on this and fill out a survey on that, it kind of gets back to that old world of why everybody doesn't answer the calls for every time something happens at a school. It's because they're like, I'll check my voicemail later, right? Like, so I don't want us to get overwhelmed with trying to communicate out and do some of the surveying unless we can connect it in with the work that we're going to do with the strategic plan. So I do think there may need to be and that's something maybe Superintendent, you and I can talk about later with regards to how do we connect that up with marketing communications, and so that we're doing it in a more strategic way. So maybe we're asking them the same questions, but we're doing them all as one big bucket as opposed to 4 different surveys, right? I know Board Member Crossett and then Board Member Armbruster.
Yes, to follow up with Board Member Lindy, Brian, the data guy, I do know that even though we switched from Panorama to Qualtrics, he was able to use the exact same questions.
Yep.
And so that was one piece of value that we didn't lose. But I do think it would be interesting to have a comparison, a year-to-year comparison, and have him go back and recalculate previous years with the new way that he's calculating so that there's a valid comparison. Thank you.
Yep, that's a great point, because if you look at what was previously presented when the strategic plan started, the way that it's presented is different, and so I think that would be interested. I have a note about that for him as well.
All right, and Board Member Armbruster.
Yes, thank you. So I was lucky enough to spend some time adjacent to the amazing data folks over at 8451. And so I'm not going to harp on you. I just want to say, as the district as a whole, one of the things I learned is that numbers can say whatever you want them to. And so one of the most important things we need to think about as a district is how to be as informative with those numbers as possible to back them up, right? So when you are surveying or when you are asking and collecting data, that demographic information is incredibly important. So we need to make sure that we are gathering that so we can say exactly who's responding to these. We can say what percentage of response did we get. We need to have the raw data available. I don't need it up here. That's not what I'm saying, but it needs to be accessible to everyone so that we can dig in if we need to be digging in and saying, so we know, was the answer to the question on a scale of 1 to 10, was it a 6? Was it a 9? How are we rating this, right? These are very, very important metrics. If we want to use them for good, we have to have this information. If not, it's just a number, and it tells us literally nothing. So moving forward, as we look at the strategic plan, as we are engaging whatever platform or whatever we're doing, I want us to be very, very intentional with what we're asking, how we're asking it, and what we're presenting. Because without that background, we can take very little action from it. Because we just don't know enough.
Alrighty. So we will now allow Mr. Turner to take a little moment of rest and allow Ms. House to come on up here and cover guardrail 2.
And the clicker does work.
It does
nicely.
work. Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you. Good afternoon. All right, we're going to try this again. I think you can hear me now. Good afternoon, board members and staff and superintendent, and thank you, Mr. Turner. So here to talk about guardrails, guardrail 2A, really getting into looking at our percentage of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students with a Category 2 infraction compared to white students. And just as a reminder, Category 2 infractions, what I like to share with staff and with parents, just to kind of give them a scope of what that means. Those are those infractions that can lead up to suspension or visits to Promise Center. There are those exclusionary consequences that we see with that level. So looking at our first semester numbers, we see that with our white students at 4%, with our Black students 18%, and Hispanic 5%, multiracial 12%, and then combined with those students of color 15%, and then the gap that we see 11% for first semester. Just to share with you on the anecdotal data point, what we do is we look at the infractions that students have, and we make sure that we're only tallying one student and not a student with multiple infractions so that the data is skewed. And so it takes us a little bit to go through that, to do that, because we didn't do that one time and we're like, oh, we need to go back and do that. So in this past presentation, we did make sure that we did that. We are hitting our target of where we are, but it's not good enough. So with this data, I know that I'll present the other, but I do want to get into some of the strategies and things that we're doing to really talk about the disproportionality and having schools understand what that means. That because of your school population, and we really were able to narrow it down to 6 schools that had a population of at least, that was statistically significant, of 10 at least white students and students of color that had a Category 2 infraction. We were able to really look at the data analysis to see, is there disproportionality? And we were able to identify 6 schools that fell into that category that we've started to work with. We've had some very intimate and transparent conversations. What's going on? What do you think is going on? Where do you think some misconceptions are? And not necessarily pointing the finger at people or individuals, but looking at why is our system producing this data, and what do we need to do to change the system to change the student outcomes. So that's our goal. That's kind of what we're doing, just to give you some feedback on that. Guardrail 2B, the percentage of Black male students with the Category 2 infraction just compared to white male students. So really just looking at those two. And we do see that we have 6%. I mean, it is decreasing with the white males. I know that when we presented over time, we're like, okay, is it because we're writing up white males less? Like, what's going on here? But we still know that there is an area of improvement with the gap between our Black males specifically and our white males. I believe our target for this year was 16.5, and so we are at 16 with the gap, but we're still working to decrease that, because ultimately what we're really trying to communicate is what is our student experience for all of our students, regardless of race, ethnicity, even their exceptionality. How are we able to ensure that how we respond is in an equitable sense? So just a couple things that we're working on, reinforcing staff use of restorative practice, not just as a big formalized thing, but a part of everyday practice. If there is a student that is removed and they are sent to the ALC or the Promise Center, how are we really having restorative conversations with that child to figure out what happened? What do we need to do differently? How do we help support the child so they really feel like they are a part of the community? Continuous embedded delivery of PD, of the code of conduct. We still have some ways to go we do see that in our discipline data, still have high rates, and we do see some inequities of using some of the category descriptors, whether it's disruptive behavior, disobedience, or the categories that they're able to choose, looking at those. Which one did we choose? Why did we choose it? Why did we choose the category 2 when it really falls into the category 1 framework? We are blessed that we were able to print off the code of conducts and have those out so we can continue to use that as a resource, so that teachers and teams and administrators can even look to see how we can get better on making sure that we're identifying the right category. That way we have a better alignment with how we respond, and we're equitable in our responses as well, as opposed to one teacher writes a student up for one thing, they might have a talk in a restorative conversation, whereas the other might be suspended out of school. So we want to, for the same infraction, we want to make sure that we're working on that. One of the things that we are going through with several buildings is really looking at how we can help support them with professional development around trauma-informed care. So we're providing trauma-informed care PD to many different schools, and there are a couple schools we're actually doing systems work with the Mayerson Center at Children's Hospital to really look at, beyond the PD, what are things in our system that we need to look at so that it's more trauma-informed in our response, and how we're supporting our staff as well. We want to continue to strengthen the use of our ALCs and our de-escalation strategies so that we're not responding to students. If we see students not meeting our expectation, we want to make sure as adults our response does not escalate, but that we're able to de-escalate. But then we also want to make sure that our response is in a trauma-informed manner. Sometimes behavior that we see is not necessarily the student doesn't like the adult, it could be a trauma response. And so how do we make sure that staff are aware of those things and those triggers so that we can help support? Continued action steps, SEL, we are seeing improvement in those schools with reduction, particular areas of behavior as we continue to go through the SEL curriculum and opportunities and the resources that are provided. The main point of feedback that I've received from teachers that have really okay, and our focus this year have been middle schools and their implementation. We've had a wonderful collaboration with advisory. So that is where that is taking place. In advisory, the teacher goes, as a result, my relationships have been better with the kids because of these lessons. And so that's great anecdotal feedback, and we're hoping that we see it on the spring survey to be able to kind of tie some, hey, these strategies that we're doing, they're hitting multiple areas. And so we're hoping to see that. With the SEL, we want to explicitly teach behavior. We have expectations, but we want to make sure that our students understand what those are and explicitly teach them, and not just consequence behavior, and also to teach that self-regulation skills for our students. Things that we're working on, and we're having this constant conversations with ITM, is working on focus and focus reports so that schools can have access in real time to understand what the reports are and how to interpret the data correctly, because depending on how you pull the data, it can give you different results. And so sometimes they might say, well, it has to be wrong. Well, no, it depends on the input that we give. It might give us a different answer based on what we're looking for. What is the question we're trying to answer? So we want to continue to do that to inform schools so they can make real decisions in their PBIS plans and with their staff. And one thing that we are continuing to do this year is just provide monthly updates to the leadership team so that they're aware when they're in the buildings, how they can support, where are our hot spots, how are we improving, how are we decreasing. That way, because it is hard information for sometimes schools to hear that your school is struggling on paper, that you have a lot of referrals. And so some of the things that we've been doing, meeting with schools, talking about their successes and saying, yeah, you might have had the most, but did anybody come back? We need to tell you that you also had the greatest reduction from the months of November to December. So the things that you put in place, let's keep going. Don't give up, because it's going to take some time when you talk about improving culture. And then the biggest thing, consistency is going to be our tool for sustained improvement. Strategically, we have the most incidences from grades 6 through 9. So that is going to continue to be our focus. This year, we had targeted foci around kindergarten, 6th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. We want to continue to focus in really that 6 through 9. That is our powerhouse. Not only is that the area where we see the most discipline incidences, but we see the highest rates of chronic absenteeism as well. They go hand in hand. And so we're going to continue to have better alignment and strategies and intentionality around supporting those levels. And we want to just continue to reduce the inconsistencies within building levels and school level expectations, and prioritize embedded PDs. So giving them a little bit at a time, working on what are we going to test, what are we going to change, as opposed to the one day, here we're going to give you everything that you need to do throughout the course of the year, because it's just not sustainable. And we want to see continuous movement and progress. And I think that is to A and B.
All righty. So I'm hoping, Director House, that you are comfortable standing there, because I imagine folks are going to have some questions for you. So I will open it up to board members here. See Board Member Armbruster.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. You're welcome. This work is so impactful and one of my favorite things that CPS is doing. I got involved through my LSDMC, tracking this for my own school, and incredibly impactful. So thank you. I love that you came to me with this data, not repeating students to skew the data. Thank you for doing that. That was going to be one of my first questions, so I appreciate that. And that you have pulled out 6 schools that have the highest discrepancy, so you can focus in on them. I think those are really, really key points that you're doing. The only question I really have as both a volunteer and a youth coach within CPS, I know we don't have the ability to run these programs for those people, but is there a way for us to make some of the skill building resources available at the building level so that the school could make them available to those groups? Because they're in there dealing with those students after hours during the school day, and I would love for those people to also have access to some of this training as well.
Absolutely. And there's training that our department even provides at the school level, and we will provide, if anybody's willing, we will provide it and make it fit whatever the context that we have. We have gone to schools and provided mental health first aid to LSDMC and parent organizations. We can do a restorative practice light so that parents and caregivers are able to understand. I can imagine a coach having 2 players kind of get into it, and for them to be able to replicate the same strategies
It would be
and the
amazing.
same questions could definitely be amazing. So that is great feedback
you.
for us as next steps. And to be clear, I think, in thinking about communication, how are we clear in what the strategies are, and to make sure that we're giving those same tools so that we're speaking the same language, so that the kids don't hear a different thing at this school versus a different thing for coaching and a different thing for tutoring, that we're all kind of speaking the same language and support. Okay.
All righty. Board Member Mapp.
Thank you, Ms. House, for this presentation. I absolutely support all of the interventions that you're, and action steps that you and your team are working on, specifically because it aligns to a lot of the work, really all of the work that we've talked about and worked through with the mental health and wellness policy. So to see it actually being implemented is really great, and I'm happy to see that. I have several questions. One of the questions first, as we talk about the pre-K through 12 SEL curriculum, which was a part of the policy, can you speak a little bit more to how we are working on streamlining that throughout the entire district? So I heard you say that we're targeting certain areas, but to, again, make sure that it is comprehensive in scope. And also, I think that's something that we still need to work on adopting, correct? So if you could speak to that piece first.
Yeah, so right now we're in the phase, everyone preschool through 12th grade has access. We've been able to provide support around the tier 1, which is what the teachers have access to. where they can provide lessons. And there's even resources regarding activities. So if I don't have time to do a full lesson, but I need to do an activity on collaboration or how do I speak to my friend, they're able to do that in a time span that doesn't take away from additional instructional learning, but that can be embedded in what they're doing in the classroom. And so everyone, they have access to the tool. Our focus, just because our team is small, and we want it to be intentional, we just didn't want to say, everybody do it, and here we go. Best of luck. This year, we have targeted with our middle schools to be able to go into advisory. So Ann Allen has been a part of the team, really going in, helping to support monitoring, like looking at lessons. And for those schools that maybe implementation has been a barrier because of master scheduling or maybe different staffing, and we just need to go in and have a hands-on approach with supporting teachers, we've been able to do that because we targeted that support. Meanwhile, we do have early adopters in elementary level that were like, hey, we can't wait. And so they have already started, and they've started with some of their lead teachers that were able to just say, hey, let's just explore how much time did it really take. We know it's recommended. What were those things that really help you set this up? What were the successes and what were barriers that we need to address? Prior hand, how do we take this learning? So next year, right now in our springtime, we're focusing on with our elementary schools to help them with their planning for the implementation so they're ready to go in August. And then year 3, which will be the year after, is when we fully deploy with high schools. So we wanted to do this in a 3-year systemic way, but Ann is already doing some pilot in high schools right now so that we can do learning. Some of the things that we are also doing with this SEL curriculum is we're meeting some state requirements with House Bill 123, with Aaron's Law, and so we're looking at what are the requirements at the high school level, what are things that we need to do and work with the curriculum developer to make sure that we have that so that we can meet additional requirements as opposed to just providing SEL curriculum. So that's kind of our 3-year scope and plan of being intentional, not just say, here, do it, but to be able to go into the schools, provide support so that we can help them.
Absolutely. Thank you for elevating this work. I know it's a huge lift. And as it pertains to the SEL curriculum from a clinical lens, I truly appreciate that work because it is encompassing a holistic approach. It's not only just focusing on the cognitive, what are our thoughts, what are our feelings, but it's also encompassing that interoception piece, whereas students are able to connect with, okay, what am I experiencing in my body? How am I making all of this work together? As well as it being aligned to MTSS. So I love the fact that Character Strong is really making sure that it's providing a framework that touches on all of those components. Just transitioning a bit, as it pertains to the restorative practice work, I like that you're highlighting making sure that students are aware of the code of conduct, teachers are aware of the code of conduct, as well as parents, and also kind of what that menu, because I know it's online in the code of conduct, what those different responses could be for a certain infraction, right? I am curious to know, how are we integrating parents in that restorative conversation piece? I brought up before that just at a previous district, that was critical, right? So if there was a particular infraction that a student experienced that was per se, category 2, parents will be able to be a part of those restorative conversations as well to make sure that, one, their child was able to, take ownership of the incident, right? But also be in a position of being responsive, right? And being able to be integrated back into the general classes. And parents were knowledgeable about that as well and have a voice. I know that in some ways that is a challenge currently. So how are we working to integrate parent voice in those conversations who want to be collaborative partners, right? With what is happening as it pertains to school culture, climate, as well as discipline.
So our first thing is we want to make sure that the administration and leadership teams are trained so that they're aware and that they have the support. So we've been trying to be very intentional on when we had our growth plan change, what was the impact of staffing if staff moved, How can we make sure that they are trained, that staff at this middle school, even though it's different people from different schools, do they have representatives that are trained that can help support with those restorative conversations and helping? So that was one thing that we wanted to make sure that we monitored. But at the school level, we are really been working with administrators and assistant principals on, especially in those cases where students are removed from school. When we have sometimes they might call it a reentry conference, when they have a reentry conference that the parent is involved in the conference or at least aware, and we definitely should be having that with the student. We need to not just reintegrate the student to school, but we need to make sure that we have a plan and a pathway moving forward. It would be better for us to have restorative conversations before then. And so that is something that we're just working on. How can we incorporate these, especially if we are using ALC as a strategy and even as a de-escalation opportunity for our students to be able to just reflect on their behavior before it escalates? How can we train our ALC monitors on some of the behavior practices and questions that they can be asking? So at the beginning of the year, we had ALC monitors share and post in their spaces some of these same questions, restorative questions, to make sure that there was an opportunity there so that it could be implemented before we even get to the exclusionary. To answer your question, to include parents, it is a growth opportunity. I think we can do a definitely better job of informing parents of what restorative practice is and what that means in CPS, because you can Google restorative practice from anywhere and might give a negative connotation depending on what you're reading. And so I think being able to define that clearly for parents, to be able to describe what our goal is and how we are using this embedded in our culture, not just with students, but also with adults. I've had this year been able to do a restorative finance kind of meeting with the finance team so we could talk about how restorative practice, what does that look like in our central office? And so we were able to share with them some of the skills and strategies that it's not just at the school level, but it's just what we do as a district. And so I think continuing to spread that throughout is going to be helpful in our messaging because it's not just one team. It should be all of us sharing the same message.
Absolutely. Okay, 2 more questions if possible. Okay, I don't want to take, because I could go all day.
I'll abbreviate. I just get excited talking about this stuff.
As you spoke about providing more awareness and that you have been working with the administrative teams within the schools, teachers, and I know that there's a focus on trauma-informed care as well as educating on restorative practices. Is there training that relates to, in addition to those things, to implicit bias training? And it's not anything that's negative, but as you talked about, having those hard conversations, right? So that we are making sure that we're culturally responsive to our students and families. And also, again, because we all have blind spots, right? Every last one of us. So how are we providing room and space for those type of trainings to occur in tandem with the other ones that's being provided?
It just seems like you were on a call we were talking about today. We have not had, my department has not had a specific implicit bias professional development, but what we have tried to do is throughout our trainings, whether it's restorative practice, trauma-informed care, mental health, first aid, we've tried to embed that in our PD so that they understand this is what we're talking about and understand how that comes across in our data. And even when we're giving like real life scenarios and examples of really talking about that, that's where it has come up. But we can definitely be even more direct with understanding and making those connections for people. But we've tried to embed it in our current PDs as opposed to someone feeling like it's another thing that we're doing or one more thing to check off. Because it's a part of our conversation that's going to consistently come up as long as we deal with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it strengthens us, as a district for sure. And then lastly, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because I can, but as I was looking at the data, and as you stated that, yes, we are progressing towards our goal. But as we look at the comparison between our Black students' discipline data in comparison to white discipline data, it is still very alarming. And I am concerned or curious to know if we have taken the opportunity to granulate that data or disaggregate that data a little bit further, because I'm curious to know what does that look like as it pertains to students that have been identified with a disability or an IEP, right? And then also what that even means for how it's impacting our data. And so I'm really curious to know about that information, especially because we do know that there's typically a misrepresentation or over diagnoses, right, of students, especially, and I'll call it out, Black and brown students that are being identified with disabilities, and how that is impacting them either academically or with discipline. And so I'm just curious to know if those conversations are being had. I know that you do work closely with Ms. Reeves, but what we can do systemically to begin to also change that narrative. And so I'll just leave it there.
Yes, we monitor that, and we talk about it weekly at our quality improvement huddles with Children's Hospital. It was one of the things that we identified in our data when I started looking at the common factors in the subgroups. It was a high representation of students with disabilities that were having Category 2 infractions, or even I look at the daily roster of students that have been referred to the Promise Center, and it is a very high number of students with disabilities. So we monitor that. We look at that number, and then we also call out our students of color that are students that are identified with students with disabilities. So we call out just students with disabilities as a whole, and then we call that out. They are not at the same rate as their non-disabled peers. It is still high, but we have decreased each and every month. So the interventions that we've been putting in place have been helping, but I can definitely share with the superintendent to be able to share out with the board what those percentages and what those numbers have been, just so that you can see that where we are as a district.
Okay, that definitely would be helpful. And I know for myself, I'll continue to follow that information, because again, we want to make sure that we're providing accurate support and systems for our students to be successful.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Board Member Bolton, and then Board Member Lindy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the work. And y'all have to run the schools and teach the kids. I mean, it's like I can't do that anymore sitting here, but I do want to say that I'm reaching a point of not wanting to fund the Promise Center in its current makeup. I don't think we have found a way. It was breakthrough when we put it together. I just don't see the results helpful. And I'm going to say again, too, that I still believe, and I know nobody on staff, especially in the buildings, want it, but I still see some major value in school suspension within the home school instead of sending them someplace else. But I really liked what you said about the interfacing or the overlapping regarding absenteeism and behavior. And I think of being able to focus in every school on that particular cohort. Where is that overlap? I am interested in funding at that grade level, the middle school concept at our middle schools, because that is the flashpoint. That is ground zero. The little people are the little people. When the high school kids have figured out most of what they need to figure out. But we still have this issue, and that's one of the reasons we created it. So I still don't think we're funding and staffing the middle schools to the level that you need to have the concept of middle school. And I think the concept of middle school should help this in some way, although I'm hearing from neighbors and what have you that things are improving. You know, we're building the ship as we're going. I'm interested, just I think two more things. I am very concerned about overage kids. having a negative impact in the classroom. And we've talked about that for a number of years. It does seem to have, and even a decade ago, people even talked about it as a movement, as to what do you do with the overage kid? Because they can have a negative impact instead of a mentoring impact, if you will. The other point for me is, to what degree are we able to ask families? I know they have to sign things, consent forms for medical care, but what do we have as a tool when we really think that our kids need to have some mental health help? And does the family have the capacity to say no, or how is that handled? Because I'm very worried about the fact that some of this is not just a matter of bad behavior. It's something far more serious for a kid, for good reason, and justifiable things have happened to them that make them behave in a particular way. I'm also very interested in tracking a little bit more violence. I'm very, very concerned about actual physical violence. The verbal violence is obvious and terrible, but I'm very worried about physical violence. I see it in the sidewalks and whatever, dismissal and what have you. I'm worried about violence regarding our staff, but most importantly, violence of the kids. Last thing for me on attendance, I'd really like to know where the problems occur. Are the problems in the classroom? Are they in the hall? What time of day? And I know you all have a kind of a SWAT team approach, a full court press or something. You know when the time is happening. And I think it'd be kind of interesting for us to see are there things that we could do about the facilities? Are there things that we could do about the timing of the day or the length of the day or the what have you? So those are some of the things that, looking at what you all do, to be thinking about, at least from my perspective. But again, I'm not really interested in funding Promise Center any longer.
Definitely understand the concerns, and I believe there was a question about what is the correlation between when students are assigned to the Promise Center and how does that how does discipline pour into chronic absenteeism? So what I will say in my response is that when a student is assigned to Promise Center and they attend, they are present in school because we are providing instruction. When they do not attend, that is when it counts as chronic absenteeism. It adds up very fast because the students are not just assigned for 1 or 2 days. So if they're assigned for 10 days or more and they do not attend, that's when that does hurt in that regard. Thinking about the category in violence, I can definitely, depending on how it was categorized, might show some different things so we can kind of parse that out. If we think about our code of conduct and thinking about category 3 infractions as the most severe, those bad situations, historically over our 6-year average, we have decreased, I believe, almost every month. So even though the numbers are decreasing, it's still hard, and every incident is not good. We don't ever want students or staff or community members in that situation. So that's something constantly that we look at. I know each building is a little different. What I can say as far as from this year, the superintendent and the leadership team and facilities and security have been great as we've been meeting with teams regarding areas and opportunities that we see improvement to help support with the middle school and the middle school model and resources that they need. That might be as simple as, can we put an alarm on this door? We might not have ever needed an alarm, but we need one now. Or to maybe cameras for more visibility in certain areas. And they've been really, really great and so responsive in meeting that. And so we'll continue to meet and we'll continue to support. We definitely know that is our hot spot, 6 through 9. So just know we'll always have some data regarding that area. Yeah.
All righty, Board Member Lindy.
Thank you. And I apologize, I have to step out here in just a second, but I really want to say thank you. That's all. I think that it is easy to talk a lot about issues of racial equity and outcomes in school districts And it's a different thing to have a strategy and a measurement plan to check to see whether or not we're making progress on this. I do think this is an area where I've seen some movement in my time on the board. And I just wanted to express some gratitude and say thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I do want to make one last statement.
Oh, you got more statements you're gonna make here, so there's more questions.
It was about we do have a great partnership with MindPeace on continuing to provide access around mental health supports. We are blessed with our social workers, which are they're able to provide a layer of that and to fill in the gaps. And so we're definitely working on that, on how to increase that.
All righty, Vice President Moffitt.
Well, thank you for this data. Clearly, we had a lot of questions, and so you've been able to answer them succinctly, and I appreciate that. Do you have a question? More than one.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to the data of the 6 schools that you'll provide to the superintendent, and hopefully we'll get that rather timely. I am anticipating by some of our conversation today that middle schools are where some of those increases are in the middle school age. And in conversations with the community, I also would agree that that is a consistent concern. Part of what I am concerned about is my support of middle schools was because that demographic had significant challenges academically with regard to mental health, needed extra support with regard to discipline. I don't know, I love what you are doing, but I am afraid that it sounds like we're doing the same thing for everybody and not providing intentionality towards a demographic that we know needs extra support. That was what they were designed for. Historically speaking, ever since I've been on this board, there's been a question around the disparity in discipline for this demographic. While I see changes, I do not understand how we are still with numbers this high. I absolutely, I've been with you and your team at graduation for 2020. Like I have watched you all. So I think the resources are there. I think the intention is there. Like we have the secret ingredients. I am questioning how that is being used consistently. And I doubted that until I heard what you said around students that are assigned to the Promise Center and attend. That part right there is the introduction of ambiguity for students. And that's where part of the lack of consistency is, right there, because they can be assigned to it. I'm assuming our staff is using the same criteria, and that's probably pretty consistent. But parents do have choices around attendance, and there's inconsistency there. So I'm gonna ask a different question in that, what is the attendance rate for students that are assigned and attend, and that are assigned and don't? I would also like those schools that those students attend and the grade levels. Because I have a very sneaky suspicion, again, not supported by data, just my thoughts, that it's in the areas that we already know are problematic. So I don't understand as a board member and as a researcher, why if we have this data, and to board member Armbruster's point, I am a researcher, I know data can say what we want it to say. So having said that, why we're not addressing the concerns more succinctly, because the data is there. And I don't want fluff. I think this is great data, but I'm not interested in that. What I am interested in, and which is why I asked for you to come, because I would like to know where there are gaps. Because what we are always presenting is what's right, and it looks great, and it says, oh, this is wonderful, wonderful data. And, it's 80-something%. That's closer to, that makes people feel good. But we have to reimagine discipline for our students. And that's a tougher conversation that I don't know if we're having that conversation because we're stuck on trying to improve a number. So I am going to invite you to supply to the superintendent, who will share with us, and I'm going to ask again, if I don't get it soon, for the data around what needs to happen as we are designing budgets, as we are creating a strategic plan, as we are talking about engaging the community, what needs to happen? Because I was going to ask a question to Board Member Mapp's point around engagement. We have parents that want to engage. That was one of the whole policies that we talked about. But where is it that we can interject that? Part of that is the attendance, I'm afraid that we're not reimagining this. We're trying to patch it up, we're trying to make it sound great and put a nice little bow on it, and the data is still crappy. I do not understand. If you could go back to the data around white males and black males, I just don't understand that. And historically, we're looking at, well, it's trending down, but it's still significantly high. And everybody in the community is talking about it. Like, that's not a good number. I also am looking at students with disabilities. I would love that information because I know that is a precious demographic, and it's known. Does this number include students with disabilities? This is just everybody?
Yes.
So I'm curious as to what is it going to look like when we take them out and we are intentional around, particularly if they're in middle school, or we are intentional around addressing some of their issues around, and then increasing engagement in those issues, increasing parent understanding of what Category 2 infractions are. How is that a manifestation of their disability? Like people need to understand that. And I only know because I used to teach. So I think we need, this is all hands on deck, because that is 6 to 9. That is the age range, the grade range that we lose them, and then they become high school dropouts. And if we know this, why are we okay with a 22%? So I have another question for you around, I'm calling it seasonal affect. But I'm gonna what I mean by that is, we know, as soon as it starts warming up, students of all across our district, 91 square miles, they get a little antsy, and then we see discipline referrals go up. Are we putting anything in place? Because we know this happens. I had my own children, and I used to tell them, can you give me till May? Just go to school, can you give me till May? So I know it happens. It happens every single year. What are we doing around keeping that number low?
Yeah, so beyond prayer, we are, this year, we have given each month a theme. And so we did a strong reset at the beginning of this year, getting everybody back into school, back into healthy habits. This month in February is Connected Hearts, really trying to connect as a community, connect with students. Our theme for next month is Choices with Impact. And so we're giving schools a toolbox of resources to be able to help, but we're meeting with all schools and their teams next week, actually, that are coming to our spring PBIS sessions to specifically talk about these areas. Some are 2-tier and 2-3 supports. There's a middle school component where we're going to focus on middle school. We're focusing on preschool and early childhood to set up appropriate behavior. So those are the things, yes, to be able to address a lot of these things and to preempt, to go from here until the end of the year, how not only do we implement great strategies, but planning better for next year as well. So kind of duality, doing those things from what we know now that worked or didn't work. How are we getting better with putting better plans in place for next year?
Are we looking at involving any incentives, any community partners around, like, hey, Buskins will give a free cookie? I don't know.
We are always open to incentives. The school teams, they have invited us. They do a lot of great work around engaging their community partners on incentives that we do see. Really, if we can improve our day-to-day interactions with kids and how kids interact with each other, that's where the big token is. And the majority of the time, the kids tell us they really appreciate this time. The stuff is okay, but it's really the time with the adults that they value.
Gotcha. Well, I really appreciate the work that you were doing, you and your team. I really do, and I appreciate you coming. I know it's not easy to be in front of us, but I still have a lot of questions for you. And so I'm looking forward to the data, and from that data, I'll have more questions, but thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. So one, I just wanted to let folks know, Board Member Crossett actually has a board obligation to go ahead to. So he's our liaison, and so he's heading over for a meeting for there. I will take two quick statements, and then I will go for anyone who's supposed to make a really quick statement, because we are going to get out of here in the next 5 minutes. So I will just say, one is that discipline is a very hard thing for us to deal with. And it's never easy, and no matter what condition a student walks in, whether they have a disability or not, discipline is just a real thing, and the fact that it destroys order in a classroom affects the learning process. So I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about is about going to make sure that we're spending the most amount of our time educating our students. So I appreciate the focus on that. I do think, again, as we've talked about with other presentations today, it will be helpful for us to also just see the story that goes with this information. So I think that's my two little points there, is that, again, I think this is all about focusing on how it improves the quality of education we see in the classroom, and how do we make sure our information shared goes towards that, that story that we need to be addressing, need to be fixing to get to that next point. I see Board Member Mapp.
I'll just close out by saying, in response to some of the things that Board Member Moffitt asked about, I just want to affirm the work that is being done. When you look at the action steps, it is very much comprehensive. And I think that the difference, as we think about the data in comparison to before and to where we are now, there were a lot of things or interventions that may have been implemented, but we're not speaking together and working in tandem. And I think that is the difference that is being made. Now, of course, it will take time, but I do think that Mrs. House and her team are trying to work on making sure that it is speaking from a systemic and comprehensive lens. And so recognizing the data with 6 through 9, trying to target that area, but also we do have to make this work comprehensive. If we start with our little ones, those behaviors, that information will matriculate upward, right, where it becomes a part of the culture. So and I'm just looking at it from a clinical perspective, all of these things will be action steps that I would definitely recommend, and I know that it's tried and proven. So I just wanted to assure you on that.
All right. So I will just do two other things real quick. One, just reminding everybody, and Dr. House, thank you for coming. One is remind everybody, we have a board meeting on Monday. So if you were not aware, you have to be back here again on Monday. The other thing is before we adjourn, I wanted to honor a legend that the nation lost a few days ago. Born on October 8th, 1941, Jesse Louis Jackson was one of the most prominent civil rights leaders in American history. And so before we leave, I just wanted to give a quote from him. It's always been one of my favorites. It happens to be a quote that he reiterated on one of my favorite TV shows growing up, A Different World. But the quote is, it is not my aptitude, but my altitude. It's not my aptitude, but my attitude that will determine my altitude or how high I will go. My mind is a pearl. I can learn anything in the world. We lost a civil rights legend as a person who's worked in civil rights for more than a decade now, myself. The Reverend Jesse Jackson is certainly one of the titans of our history in America. And so did not want to not say something about that since it just happened a few days ago. Having said that, the chair will now entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second?
All right, everybody, have a good evening.
Thanks for that.